This podcast is presented by the Prince George's County Memorial Library System.
All right, we're live.
Hi, I'm Hawa.
I'm Darlene.
I'm Hannah.
And I'm Heather.
And this is our podcast, These Books Made Me. Today we're going to be talking about Jacob Have I Loved by Katherine Paterson. Friendly warning as always, this podcast contains spoilers. If you don't yet know who can't find any references to how to speak to cats in the Bible, proceed with caution. And shout out to our colleague Kelly, who suggested this book for the podcast.
All right, so we'll start off with our usual question, which is, what did this book mean to you? And I'm curious, is this everyone's first time reading it? And if not, how did this reread compare to your memories of reading it when you were younger?
This was my first time, as usual.
I'm with you, Hawa. It was my first time too, and I was telling everyone that I got to a certain part and then I closed it and I needed to know, I needed to go look for the plot summary because I wasn't sure if it was going to be that kind of book, and it luckily wasn't, so I continued reading it.
I also went in without reading the plot summary because I was just like, I'm going to have to read it anyway, so what's the point of me knowing what it's about?
Were you having like sisterhood flashbacks to like an inappropriate relationship?
Yeah, I was like, wait, no one mentioned this when we like talked about how this was a future like episode. So I kind of knew it couldn't be anything inappropriate, but I still needed to verify for myself.
So I read it growing up. I don't remember what age. In fact, I don't remember anything about the book other than I read it. So it was kind of like reading it for the first time, even though I know I read it. I remember liking it. Other than that, I got nothing.
Yeah, I think I read this during like 4th or 5th grade. I know I did it for accelerated reader points. That was a lot of my books during those years were to get accelerated reader points so I could buy candy in the store, which was what we could change our accelerated reader points for.
Positive reinforcement.
Yeah, I would usually try to read the books that were worth the most points, like even if they were too hard for me. This was not too hard for me, but it was like a longer book because I think it was like a couple hundred pages, so it had more points than like smaller books or more slim books. My recollection of it was that it was a book where the two sisters hated each other. And I think I vaguely remembered the hurricane scene, but I did not remember much else. You know, the Katherine Paterson book that really stuck with me was Bridge to Terabithia. But I liked this book when I read it as a kid. And, you know, reading it now, I think it's well written. You know, I think the language is very evocative and beautiful in points, and she did a lot of research to try to make it sound historical fiction. So, yeah, I didn't remember it being quite so nuanced and weighty as a book.
Side note, we may have to cover Bridge to Terabithia at some point, the book that traumatized many of us growing up.
Yeah.
I was going to say that it was my first time reading it, but then I always, whenever it is my first time, I always think like, oh, how would I have read this if I was younger? And to Heather's point about it being very nuanced, I feel like there are not many things I would have latched onto as a kid. I still prefer it when it's like that. Like, I still prefer like reading it as a kid, not getting much out of it, but then reading it as an adult and then kind of finding more there. So I kind of wish that was the experience I had, but yeah.
This may kind of lead into the sort of broader issue that I think we've talked about before, that a lot of times it's adults picking the award winners for kids. Mm-hmm. And so frequently it seems like the award-winning books have a lot to appeal to adults in them, but maybe they're not fun reads necessarily. Like they do tend to be a little bit weightier or more nuanced or more poetic, or historical fiction does really well in award seasons, it seems like. Mm-hmm. And I think this book might be kind of a good example of that because, again, it didn't really stick with me beyond I remember enjoying it as a kid. But, you know, I didn't take away from it probably what I took away from it now as an adult reading it. Like, I think I more clearly understood what she was trying to do with the book this time. All right, we're moving on to a plot summary. This one's pretty dense. 13-year-old Sarah Louise Bradshaw lives in a waterman's village on the isolated island of Rass in the Chesapeake Bay in 1941. While Sarah Louise prefers her full name, she is alternately called Wheeze or Louise by everyone in the village. Her home life is complicated. She is a twin, and her sister Caroline was born fragile but beautiful and has received attention for her health issues, her beauty, and her musical gifts since birth. Sarah Louise resents the attention and adoration her sister receives and wishes she could have been born a boy, believing her opportunities would have been better and she would have been more valued by her family. Her father is a war-wounded waterman, eking out a living on the Chesapeake. Her mother is a college-educated mainlander and former teacher who left life on the mainland behind after falling in love with her husband, a crabber and fisherman who left school in 7th grade. Her paternal grandmother also lives with the family and is extremely religious and favors Caroline. Sarah Louise helps supplement the family income by taking out a skiff to catch whatever can be found and sold with a fellow misfit, Carl Purnell. When Caroline is coddled and given private voice lessons on the mainland due to her talent, Sarah Louise swallows her bitterness and looks for something, anything, that would make her feel special. When a mysterious older man arrives in town and takes up residence in the old abandoned Wallace house, Sarah Louise thinks she's found her opportunity. She believes he's a German spy and she would be decorated by President Roosevelt if she catches him, so she enlists Carl and they start counter-espionage efforts. Ultimately, those efforts do not catch a spy, but they do catch Mr. Hiram Wallace as a surrogate father of sorts for Carl and as a friend for Sarah Louise. A series of adventures transpire as Hiram enlists Carl and Sarah Louise to help him restore the home of Trudy Braxton, the village cat lady. After finding the house and the very ill Mrs. Braxton, overrun with cats, Hiram decides the only way to dispose of the feral cats is to drown them. Sarah Louise flees from the boat to avoid the task, and ultimately, no one can bring themselves to kill the cats. In steps Caroline, who drugs the cats and cons the local neighbors into taking one cat apiece. A violent hurricane hits the island, destroying Hiram's home. Sarah Louise goes out in the storm to rescue Hiram, and he begins living with the Bradshaws. Sarah Louise realizes she has a crush on Hiram and is devastated when Caroline receives Hiram's praise when she comes up with a quickie marriage scheme that resolves Hiram's homelessness and Trudy's inability to live alone without care. Hiram then pays for Caroline to attend a mainland boarding school, but makes no such offer to Sarah Louise, who ultimately drops out of school to help her father on the boat when Carl leaves to join the Navy. She plans to leave the island when Carl returns and can rejoin her father on the boat. That never happens as Carl decides to leave the island behind to go to school and marry Caroline. Sarah Louise, in the meantime, is stuck at home with her increasingly demented grandmother who follows Mrs. Bradshaw around quoting scripture and calling her a whore. Sarah Louise finally breaks and years of resentment come pouring out. Anger at her grandmother's cruelty, disgust at the waste her mother made of her privilege, jealousy at the privilege that Caroline has been given. Her mother tells her that she will miss her horribly, but they would never force Sarah Louise to stay on the island. Sarah Louise can finally shake off her feelings of obligation to her family and figure out what she wants for herself in life. She has always wanted to see the mountains and become a doctor. After hitting a roadblock due to being a girl, Sarah Louise is denied medical school entrance by her advisor at UMD. Go Terps. Actually, this is not a great look for Maryland. And transfers to the nursing school at Kentucky. She becomes a nurse midwife in a small town called Truett in the Appalachian Mountains. She marries a Catholic widower, becomes a stepmother, and ultimately has a son she names for her father. The book closes as Sarah Louise delivers a local woman's twins, giving the stronger twin to the mother and taking the fragile twin to her own breast.
Okay, we're going to do a brief author bio. Katherine Paterson was born Catherine Wommeldorf on October 31st, 1932, in Qingzhou, what is now Huai'an, China, to missionary parents George Raymond and Mary Gotchius Wommeldorf. She is the third of their 5 children. Chinese was Catherine's first language, and she would later learn English with a British accent. Catherine's family returned to the United States at the start of World War II, and they lived in North Carolina and Virginia. Their return to China was indefinitely postponed. Paterson experienced trouble making friends and fitting in with the American children she went to school with, and was both a reader and a writer from a young age. As a young adult, Paterson attended King College in Bristol, Tennessee for 4 years and studied English and literature. After graduation in 1954, She taught 6th grade for a year in Lovettsville, Virginia, which would be the future inspiration for Bridge to Terabithia. Paterson then earned her MA in teaching from the Presbyterian School of Christian Education before traveling to Kobe and Shikoku, Japan, to serve as a missionary. She would return to the United States in 1961 for a fellowship in New York City at Union Theological Seminary, where she would also meet John Barstow Paterson. They married in 1962 and would raise 4 children together. Paterson began writing while working at a prep school called Pennington School for Boys in New Jersey, when her work creating curricula inspired her to start writing fiction. After enrolling in a creative writing class, she wrote and eventually published her first work in 1973, The Sign of the Chrysanthemum, a young adult novel set in Japan. Paterson's famous book, Bridge to Terabithia, was published in 1977, and Jacob Have I Loved was published in 1980. Paterson has received the Laura Ingalls Wilder Medal from the ALA and is the vice president of the National Children's Book and Literacy Alliance, which advocates for literature and literacy. She lives in Barre, Vermont.
Okay, let's go ahead and dive into our discussion. This book is local to us. It centers very prominently on the Chesapeake Bay, and the Bay more or less is a main character in the book. What did you all think about the way that Paterson characterizes the Bay, the role it plays in the book? Anything, really?
Well, there's a paragraph. I'm trying to, I think it's relatively near the start of the book. Let me see if I can find it, where they describe how the character of the Bay and how the women who live there don't love it. It sweeps their men away, occupies their time. I'm summing this up poorly, but let me see if I can find that. I feel like that maybe that struck me as a good sort of summation of at least one characterization of the Bay.
Okay, I think I found it. She says, "The women of my island were not supposed to love the water. Water was the wild, untamed kingdom of our men. And though water was the element in which our tiny island lived and moved and had its being, the women resisted its power over their lives as a wife might pretend to ignore the existence of her husband's mistress." And then it says, "For the men of the island, except for the preacher and the occasional male teacher, the Bay was an all-consuming passion. It ruled their waking hours, sapped their bodily strength, and from time to tragic time claimed their mortal flesh."
That was it. That was the passage.
I will say that, like, her writing is just beautiful there. I mean, it does not feel like a book meant for a 5th grader. Just the level of the writing at times seems, she's just working at a higher level than a lot of, and so much stuff is serialized at that age. So we get kind of in the like plotty and formulaic thing. But that passage could stand as adult fiction with no problems at all. Like I wouldn't bat an eye if I saw that in an adult fiction book, and I would still think it was good writing, which I like that. I think that that's a really, really good quality for an author to have. And I think we've talked about authors who don't condescend to kids before, and I think this book is very much an example of that.
Kids can appreciate complex writing.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about the Bay anymore? We didn't really talk about that topic. We just read some.
No, I was like trying to form my thoughts because I do feel like it's really interesting the way that she characterizes the Bay, and then Sarah Louise's desire to see the mountains, like something just so completely removed from what the Bay is, even if she herself had said how much she loved it. And
almost opposite.
Yeah, and it's its own little ecosystem, or it's very isolated in many ways. So it's interesting that then, like I said, that then she then ends up somewhere else that's also really insular and isolated, and that's why she kind of really had to stay, because they don't have access to medical care otherwise. If she didn't stay,
I think ecosystem is a really good term for it. I was thinking, as we were talking about this now, it's very, like you said, it's isolated, it's insular. I mean, you kind of draw a parallel between the Bay, which is kind of sheltered from the rest of the ocean. Like they explicitly mention at one point that unlike some of the other people who work on the water, the people who make their living on the bay don't need to worry about submarines because they're sheltered. But at the same time, it's pretty limited. You make your living this way. You talk to these people. You speak this way. You know this many.
There's only one religion. Like
yes.
they say, the whole island is Methodist.
It's a tiny little monolithic in a way culture, and you either like it or you leave. So if you adapt to it and it speaks to you, great. If you can make a living there, great. But the options are limited, even though you're sheltered in some ways from maybe things that you don't care for outside or feel unsafe to you.
It is interesting, though, like Darlene said, that the community she chooses for herself, she even says that it's, in some ways, it's more of an island than Ras Island is because she compares, their jeeps to the boats and, the mountains ringing them in is like the bay surrounding the island because it really keeps outsiders away. And this, the culture in the city or the town that she ends up in Truett, it also has this, like, it's predominantly, Polish immigrants and it's, a lot of Catholics there, and has its own identity as well. And then she's able to kind of make her own identity there because she doesn't have the baggage that she had with the islanders viewing her within the context of her family. So she goes there, but then she's in just a different community where she repeats her mom's history, basically. And I did think it was sort of interesting that they paralleled her with her mom so much because it seemed like the mom was also struggling to stand out. Like she didn't want to be basic and go to Paris like everyone else. Like that was because she said well, everyone was doing that at the time. You went to Paris and you tried to write a novel and that was what privileged ladies of her time were doing. And while she kind of wanted that, she wanted to do something that stood out and was different. So she went with this romantic notion of I'll go to this island and, it's so removed and all of this. But then she stayed. I did want to ask about the mom and dad's relationship. It is generally depicted as fairly healthy. Like they very clearly are still very much in love with each other. But that being said, Sarah also has this Sarah Louise thinks about whether her parents' marriage will survive. Like she gets a magazine at one point that's to diagnose her parents' relationship health. And she worries about that because she can't see what they would have in common, which, with her and her sister, they have nothing in common and they have a completely fractured relationship. So I think she's sort of putting that onto her parents' relationship as well. Like, how do you tolerate each other when there's no common ground? And she can't really understand their relationship until she meets her husband and Joseph. That was kind of a weird meeting though, because
they just sit down for coffee and
and then she really resents that he says that the Lord brought her there.
She's like, what do you know about me?
And then his response to her, she was like, then I knew I was going to marry him, which did feel a little odd to me.
Yeah, I was wondering if I just missed something there because I was like, I don't know how his response sealed the deal for you. That being said, I think they did do a nice callback to her dad singing to the oysters. Is that what it was? And so hearing you talk now, I was wondering if that also kind of answers that question. Like, why does Ms. Bradshaw stay? Or how can their relationship work, right? And you find out all her backstory about how she used to write poetry. And so it's kind of like that romanticism exists within him too. It's just a little, kind of under the surface. And then I think when she meets her husband, I think she says she could envision him singing to the oysters, right?
Yeah. So she says, But then, oh my blessed, he smiled. I guess from that moment, I knew I was going to marry Joseph. God, Pope, 3 motherless children, unspellable surname and all. For when he smiled, he looked like the kind of man who would sing to the oysters.
But Katherine Paterson spent more time describing the chemistry she felt with the captain.
Absolutely. And his hands.
Beautiful hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we should address that elephant in the room since it almost made Darlene stop reading the book. Yeah, Sarah Louise's crush on Hiram is, it's
Came out of left field.
It's kind of painful too, because like when you're that age, you feel things so intensely, even if it's a stupid thing, which this is. Like clearly, he's an older man, like. She's 14 and then she still gets rejected by him because he turns like all of his affection and attention onto Caroline.
Sorry, I'm like looking through some of the highlights that I have. One of the highlights is, I guess this is when they're talking about like, oh, the captain should marry like Trudy, and they're like, oh, they won't do anything. And it says, I was so hot all over at the suggestion of the captain doing something that I could hardly breathe. Girl, he's like, he could be your grandpa.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Maybe stop worrying about what they're doing or not doing.
Well, and then the grandma like leans into it too, because then she's like weirdly chastising Sarah Louise for being like a harlot for like, it's the dynamic in that family is really dysfunctional.
But it's so interesting that like she notices the crush, because I think then it's revealed to us later that she too had a crush on the captain when he was younger. Yes. So I thought that was a nice callback, that it wasn't just out of nowhere. She just is really discerning, because everything else she says is kind of very wacky.
Yeah,
and
the
just
grandma
kind of
is like
there.
Unhinged as a religious zealot, which that relationship between the Bradshaws, I mean, I guess it was a different time and you just had to put up with a lot more, but it is never clear to me why the dad never really sticks up for the mom. Like he's super passive, like he kind of redirects, but not very effectively. I mean, she's following her around just constantly talking about like, you're a sinful whore, that, my son deserves better, basically. And to the degree that her mom is like, you know what, I'm going to go outside and wash the windows with ammonia just to get away from the grandmother.
Yeah.
Could it be a religious thing? Like almost like they feel like they have to hold their grandmother in this type of respect. Like, but it seems like the grandmother is like the more like overly religious one. So maybe he just, I don't know.
I'm trying to figure out, like, do we think the grandmother she's suffering from early dementia? I'm trying to figure out what her...
I think so. By the end, she seems like something is like actually wrong with her. At the beginning of the book, though, I think it's pretty clear that the grandmother has always been like she is at the beginning of the book, which is very cold to Sarah Louise. She kind of dotes on Caroline, but is extremely like judgmental about people and just, really religious, and kind of everything is through this lens of like piousness and how you're supposed to be. Yeah. So like, yes, it seems like the wheels are coming off worse at the end, but it also seems like she was always like that to some degree. It just maybe got more escalated.
I kind of wanted to cheer for Sarah Louise when she decided to stop going to church. And I was like, well, let the grandmother deal with that.
That was an interesting bit too. So there's that scene where Sarah Louise gets her first period and her mom lets her skip church, like pretends that she's sick, which that in of itself, I think would have been like sinful, but they don't want to let the grandmother know that that's why she's missing church, which seemed weird to me because I feel like the grandmother might have actually been okay with her missing for that reason, because like she had stained her. But
the grandmother was upset at the mere idea of Sarah Louise's underwear drawer. So maybe the idea of her having a stain on her dress and underwear would have been too much.
I was going to say, maybe my thought about them not telling the grandmother about the period thing was maybe, this is probably a reach to be honest, but maybe like her having her period made her a quote unquote woman now. And maybe the mother had some concerns about maybe if the grandmother would get into some kind of crazy overprotective mode. That's just a reach, to be honest.
But she says Caroline had started her period the year before or something like that, or 2 years before.
Okay.
And the grandmother was like so much favoritism towards Caroline and doesn't seem to be trying to like hook her up with a local boy or something, though I guess ultimately she does hook up with a local boy, which that also seemed really strange to me. Like I did not feel like there was the groundwork to establish why Caroline and Call would have ever ended up together.
Especially considering that the whole time Call was gone, he only wrote Wee's one letter, and I guess he was making sure he was keeping up with Caroline because when she came back and she's like, yeah, she's at Juilliard. He's just like, I know. And then she goes and puts on this super cutesy dress just for her to find out that you married to my twin sister.
Yeah.
Or engaged.
But I just, like, I got it from Call's perspective. Like, he went after the prettiest girl on the island and, you know, whatever. But what was the
appeal for her?
Exactly. Like,
So,
Caroline's living her New York life.
That's true.
Why?
Maybe
she has,
loves
like,
a man
all the options in the world, and she goes with
a man in uniform.
But Call, I don't know.
But
Call
you hadn't
seemed
really
very
seen him.
off to me in certain ways. Like the beginning of the book, like I feel like his very literal sort of approach to everything. Like, are we meant to think he's neurodivergent? Because that was my read at the beginning of the book, but then I feel like that was clearly not supposed to be how he was once he came back from the Navy. So we're really like, people just need to get out of
that annoying
the
kid.
stifling environment of the island to become who they're meant to be or something.
I don't know, but I will say that because I had stopped reading and then I read the whole plot summary, I knew that Call and Caroline were going to get together. And so I think I then started putting meaning to any interaction that they had.
Okay.
Like, I think that, like, if I had not done that, I think what would have, like, stood out to me was Sarah Louise's, like, annoyance with Caroline always asking about Call. Like, I think I would have focused more on, like, Sarah Louise being a little bit more, like, jealous and protective of her friend versus, like, because I, read the plot summary and I knew they would end up together, I was like, oh, I wonder if these are, like, small, subtle hints that Caroline kind of already, even before he leaves, already kind of likes Call.
Which I understand is like a teen feeling.
Oh, I
because,
see. Yeah.
like, on the island, there would be no options. I mean, you're looking at a place that has like a couple hundred people that live in it or something.
Mm-hmm. That's what it seems like.
And, how much of that would be kids? Like, I don't know, 50, 60 kids or something.
They were like,
Yeah, they're high school.
They're high school.
Yeah.
They were the only few freshmen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, what were the options? You'd have like 5 people in your class or something. Which was weird with Sarah not having friends too, because like, who else could she be friends with? She's got her sister, Call, and like there's maybe like 2 other people her age on the island.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe she had to get away from the island, see what other men were out there, what they had to offer for her to, like, fall back and be like, oh, this was the one for me. I don't know. I'm just reaching here.
See, I took it as the more she explored the world, the more that it was like, this is a really safe person for me. I know he's going to worship me because, like, he's still going to, in his mind, it would be that, she was the prettiest girl on the island. And so, I don't know. That's how I took it. Because I was thinking a lot about it as it was finishing. They don't really say a lot about their dynamic as a married couple, but I kept thinking, like, are they gonna last? Because the more that she, like, lives life, and especially, like, in New York, she'll realize that there's only but so much that sort of, like, unwavering devotion to you is gonna be enough.
I think she's gonna get bored with him.
But I mean, he's lived life too, right? Like, he was in the Navy. He's seen the world.
He visited all the islands.
But so has like everyone now at that point because of the war. So that's like every man her age would have done that.
I mean, honestly, it's weird to me that people who grow up that closely together, and I guess the fact that you're in a small environment with few options goes some way to counteract that. But I mean, I think they've done research that shows when you grow up in a close environment with people, there are like biological reasons why people don't end up as likely to be attracted to them. So it's weird to me that Sarah Louise or Carolyn and Call would be interested in each other at all, frankly.
Well, it's sort of the like Harry Potter paradox too, right? Like everyone in Harry Potter ends up with another person that was at Hogwarts with them, basically, which is weird because they have like classes with like 10 people in them, you know, like they have a very small pool as well. But it seems, I don't know, like I guess maybe we're just supposed to believe that those like ties of home and those shared bonds are like stronger than what seems to be Caroline's like real personality, because she always from jump seems to be like, well, I'm going to be famous and I'm getting out of here. And I don't know. She just seems so much more into a cosmopolitan lifestyle, which did not seem like Call, but I guess being in the Navy changed his mind about things. But it just...
Maybe there's fewer young men now because a lot of them died.
Oh.
And also,
bleak.
I think also something to take into consideration as well is that we really are seeing these characters through Sarah Louise's eyes. So, you know, like, her sister may not be as annoying or dreadful as we think, and Call may not be as gross as she made him seem in the beginning. So maybe, and also something else to take into consideration is that I gathered from quickly glancing at my unabridged ebook version was that they would go to the captain's house together, and Sarah Louise wouldn't want to go because she was married to Trudy now. So maybe they had some kind of, you know, connection
Bond.
that formed from that as well. I don't know. I think her main concern, honestly, I think she seems like she's more irritated with the fact that her sister ended up with him than the fact that anybody that wasn't her ended up with him, if that makes sense. Like this dislike that she has for her sister. Also, we're assuming they're fraternal, right?
I think
They
it
must
must
be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't sound like they resemble each other at all.
Yeah.
They describe them as, I think, having different coloring, like Carolyn's described
Hair is
as
different.
blonde,
Skin is different.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
different, built differently.
Abridged version, so they might have skipped over that. Also, I have a fraternal twin sister as well, and I think it's just so interesting that, like, sorry to like skip around, but I think it's just so interesting that like that she feels like her part of her reason for, you know, not reason, but like she feels like her and her sister don't have anything in common, and that kind of maybe contributes to her dislike of her sister. I feel like me and my twin sister, obviously we're not every twins in the world, but we are very different, and I feel like that makes it why we work so well. But I think really what contributes to her dislike of her sister is probably more so like how everyone just seemed so concerned and fascinated with her, from her being sick to her talents, that it's just like she felt like she was an afterthought. Like she wanted people to worry about her. And that's definitely not something that I felt like I had to worry about in my dynamic with my sister. Shout out to my girl Hafsa.
But yeah, Hawa, speaking to what you were saying earlier, though, yeah, there was a point in time, I think, when Call comes back and Sarah Louise is really confused about like the fact that they're, you know, that him and Caroline are engaged. I think at some point, I think Call says like, I bet you didn't think that would happen because you didn't, I forgot how he phrased it.
He basically makes it seem like you look at me like I'm this, but really like...
Yeah.
Well, it's
so-
true. I mean, she was kind of a jerk to him, like early in the book.
Yeah.
You know, she treats him like an idiot a lot of the time because he doesn't get any of her jokes and doesn't really care about the things that she cares about. So, I mean, I totally get why he wasn't into her. I just don't get why Caroline was into Call.
Well, but what I'm saying is that because it's from Sarah Louise's perspective, yeah, like she did maybe portray him in a way that didn't look good, but anyone else would have seen like his charm, but she never could. So
Do we think that there's a possibility that Caroline only went with Cal just to spite Sarah Louise?
Yes.
Because I was thinking... I don't know. I know, Darlene, you said you went on like a Miss Marple tear after our Nancy Drew one. And I went on like a Poirot tear around that same time. And in Death on the Nile, there's a thing where he's talking to Lynette Ridgway, the like main character who's like the rich, beautiful one that has everything versus her best friend Jackie, who is poor and, you know, gets overlooked kind of thing. And he says to Lynette, who is now marrying the person that would have been Jackie's fiance, like, it's like when the person who has all of the sheep takes the one little ewe lamb that the poor person has. Like, that lamb is like everything to that person. And so, yeah, was she like enjoying the fact that she was again stealing something from Sarah Louise, like she did with the attention.
I considered that.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't think so. I think that, to me, it seems like, I think that as the one who was feeling neglected, I think Sarah Louise maybe held more resentment towards her sister than her sister held towards her. So I don't feel like...
But like, why is Caroline always making like jabs at her? Like that she's dirty, that she, like, I feel like she very much is on the same side as the grandmother through a lot of the book. And like, I don't know, Caroline's ego is kind of a lot.
It is.
When she's writing her biography, because
people want to know this.
I'm like, Caroline, you haven't done anything yet.
When she was in the choir performance
and making fun of Betty Jean, like afterwards, it's just mean. Like, why do that? Like, your performance went well, and yeah, I know that this is all through like Sarah Louise's lens, and we should probably ask how reliable she is as a narrator. But, you know, assuming that there's some truth in how she's like depicting even the conversation with her mother where she really breaks down.
Some things speak for themselves.
Yeah, like I feel like the mom really doesn't refute anything that's happened to her. She's just kind of like, yeah, we're going to miss you a lot, like even if you don't know that. But she doesn't ever say like, oh, well, Sarah Louise, I'm sorry that you felt like, we didn't know you felt like that. And like, we've always loved you equally. And we appreciated these things that you've done. All she ever gets is like some very low key acknowledgement, like, thanks for bringing some money in. But Caroline is the favored child, it seems like. And her mom doesn't even like backpedal from that. She's just like, oh, well, we'll really miss you, but we never would have forced you to stay here. You should have told us.
So,
which seems like it was an accurate like version of how life in that house would have been.
So, you know, when they're like, oh, she's like, oh, we'll miss you more. Do you believe that?
Maybe for the mom.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. Side note to what you were saying earlier. The line from Cole was like, oh, you never did think I was much to brag about now, did you?
To be fair, he wasn't. Yeah. Like, he did not have a good personality early in the book.
Oh, man. But yeah, I thought that was
also, sorry. In the line, there's a line where the captain says to give her a safe harbor. So, Caroline. So maybe it is about having somebody safe, because Call says she's alone in that world. She needs me. So it could be about that. Maybe like a small, you know, reserved island girl who is in this big city and maybe just needs a little bit of home to have with her when she's living this big fancy life. I don't know.
Maybe people aren't falling over themselves for her fragile beauty in Baltimore the way they are on the island.
Right.
Her debut in New Haven or...
That reminds me of like that conversation on social media a few years ago where it was like a 10 in New York is not the same as like a 10 in like Kentucky. Yeah.
Like Caroline's really mid, but everyone on the island just thought she was.
She's like, oh, I've been downgraded. I made a mistake.
I mean,
see, if they had made that clear that like once she left, if she hadn't kept being the like golden child, but she is still the golden child. She leaves, she gets this full ride to Juilliard. Then she gets a debut at like the New Haven Opera. Like she is clearly achieving all of these things.
She's
and at
still
least
the bee's knees.
Yeah, her talent is enough. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if they still think she's the most beautiful person, but at least her talent seems to be legitimate and on the level that she thought it was. Mm-hmm. But like, oh yeah, I don't know. I feel bad for Sarah Louise. Like just, it's a hard book to read at points because she's extremely angry throughout the book, which I think is a bold choice from the author because Sarah Louise certainly at times is not super likable herself. Like she is mean to Call.
Yeah. Almost like we wonder why they're friends, but then he doesn't really have
her only option.
Yeah, honestly.
But yeah, there's not a lot of likable characters in the book. So you really do have to try to believe Sarah Louise's version because otherwise you're not going to like anybody, I feel like.
I like the orange tomcat.
You liked Miss Braxton.
I wasn't sure if I was supposed to like the captain because, like Darlene said,
He's a weirdo.
He is a weirdo.
I do not understand what's going on with that man. There's a lot of strange things,
what?
First of all, his impulsive cutting the mast down was stupid. The Islanders should have been making fun of him for that. That was dumb. And then when he comes back, he's super weird. He doesn't tell people hey y'all, I'm back. I'm gonna fix up the house. He just lives there like a creepo until the kids go spy on him.
And then the house washes. I think the house washes away and he has nowhere to live. And then it's interesting that he lets these kids convince him to marry the crazy old cat lady. The sugar mama lady.
Yeah, which I then started to wonder about his. I started his motives because he turned so, but he was like that sounds
great idea.
Yeah, great idea, kids. You guys really nailed this one.
But also, if she had all that money, why was she living in such squalor? She could have paid, she had enough money that he took her money to send Caroline to boarding school. So there was significant funds. Why wasn't she just paying a village housewife to come clean her house or nurse her? Or
maybe she didn't realize that was something she could do, only because the book made it seem like she barely spoke. There was something, maybe I read into that wrong, because they said something she does speak.
So you thought maybe she was mentally unwell as
Yes, that's what I was thinking, because for her to have so many...
all those cats.
And to a point where, it made her sick and they had to give them away.
She's, unconscious on the floor.
Yeah.
And the cats are all crawling on her. And I was like, this is horrifying, because cats eat dead people. People that die in their homes that have, a lot of cats, they will, eat them.
Dogs will do that, too.
Yes, they will. Well, especially if they're starving. And they keep saying that the cats have, not been getting fed and...
to be honest, I'll just go on record saying if I'm dead and my cats are hungry, I'm not going to hold it against them.
In the afterlife, yeah.
Side note.
Wait, that should be the soundbite for this episode.
But why, if she had the money, why are her cats starving?
Maybe you're right, Hot, with it. She just wasn't mentally... But then, that makes Hiram super sketchy to marry her.
Yes.
Can she even consent to that?
She a vulnerable adult.
Yeah,
Exactly.
maybe the grandma
we need
was
to call APS on Hiram.
Maybe the grandma was making points. We were just thinking, because they were like, "How could you say that he poisoned her?" And it's maybe.
Shouldn't she be mad that he gave away all of her cats and nearly drowned them, unless he didn't share the piece where he nearly drowned them? Oh no. I'd be mad.
Hiram's... I don't know what's going on with him.
It's characters like him that I started to think about how I wouldn't have gotten much out of it as a kid, but or even in my teens, but I would now as an adult, because it's a lot of older people reflecting on their past lives and then informing, I think, trying to give that wisdom to Sarah Louise, right? It's the mom does that. Hiram does that, the grandma does that, and even then, she herself, she gets it kind of, it does propel her to go on into the next step in her life, but again, she needs to experience life to then reflect back on it and say well, I don't know if she fully understands just kind of how full circle things came, in that she can now truly understand her mother's perspective, but the book does that for us, and again, it's kind of are you ready for those life lessons as a teen when you don't have any sort of experience to make meaning of that advice? Looking back, that you're oh yeah, that makes sense. That they would say, to not waste away your years and to do what it is that you love. We had never really held you back. This was just yourself and your own doubts.
That seemed like gaslighting to me. I know she did kind of say oh, it was just my fears that were holding me back. But no, it wasn't. They were I feel like Sarah Louise was constantly getting I don't know. From the grandmother, I feel like it was emotional abuse at some point. From her sister, no. But she was just constantly getting talked down to or made fun of or told that she was less than Caroline or that what she wasn't good enough, or it didn't fit the norms, which I do think we should talk about gender roles for sure. But, you know, the reason she was being held back was because people were treating her pretty shabbily a lot. And like her mom never really stands up for her in any of these, you know, little vignettes that were shown where sort of Caroline and the grandmother are going at her. Like the mom will just say like, oh, thanks for the money. Or like, she's very passive about how she corrects that. And I, like, to the point that I would say she's not correcting. And like Sarah's wanting that so bad. She never defends. And that would definitely over time get into your head, I think. Like you're just constantly receiving messages that you aren't as worthy. So like, why would she have had any feeling that she had the ability to go? Like
That's
her
true.
only value to her family seems to be the money she's bringing in, and then her ability to work on the boat when she's a little bit older with her dad. And that's tough. Like, I mean, maybe they just didn't know how to like express their love appropriately, but they don't make even like attempts to explain the situation to her. It's just kind of like, get over it. Caroline's frail. Get over it. Caroline's beautiful. Get over it. She's talented, and you're not any of those things, you know?
Yeah, I think I do agree that when I was reading it, there was a bit of like anger on Sarah Louise's behalf, which I don't even know that she expressed that anger in the book. It was like mine. I was angry for her when Hiram was like, well, that's because we always knew you could do it. And it was like, what would make you believe that out of all the experiences that she's had where you basically paid for someone else's schooling, like you know, like everyone always like doted on her, like what would make you think that Sarah Louise understood that you guys just took her to be the stronger twin, or that, you know, that, I don't know, like,
Or like,
all of
why
these
don't
things.
they get that that's a burden that they've put on her? Like, it is hard to be the person that's, you know, this stable, solid, reliable person, and that's your identity. Like,
Because you want somebody to worry about you too.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's all she wanted. She said that at one point. They've put this weight on her where she feels like her only value is as a wage earner. And then they're like surprised that that felt like a millstone around her neck. And it's like, well, y'all reinforced that every step of the way and created that identity for her. Like, there's no way she created that identity for herself when she was like 5. You know, it's just years and years of being well, we don't have to worry about Sarah Louise because she's not sick and she's not, you know.
Yeah, you know, I think the mother could tell, right, that Sarah Louise was feeling slighted by the fact that Hiram was going to pay for Carolyn to like leave. And I think she had always known that Sarah Louise also wants to go to boarding school, and she's like, oh, you know, like, well, we can like try to save money and send you.
Chrisfield.
And then, you know, Sarah Louise says back, like, don't worry about it. And is like really upset about it. But
But she's an afterthought, right?
right.
too
Like
little,
she's,
too late.
yeah, I feel like she's not only is she an afterthought, but it's like they gave in too quickly. It's like, you know, that that's something she would probably like, but you didn't fight her on it because I think a part of you did want her to stay.
Yeah.
Right. And so then you're kind of continuing to like feed into this idea that she really needs to stay.
It is a pretty bleak book. I mean, yes, by the end, I think Sarah Louise has made a life for herself and carved out an identity. But, you know, her relationship with her sister is still not good. Her dad dies. The grandmother dies. So good riddance. Then, like, her mom is going to come live with them. And so now is she right back into having that weight of that identity as the caregiver again back on her?
The mom, before the mom comes to live with them, they go to see Caroline in her show.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Instead of being there for the birth, which I feel like was also just a jerk move on the part of the mom. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, like, have you not been...
She will have other shows.
Exactly.
You only give birth, which might kill you once. And she knows that, like, the husband is going to have to deliver the baby because Sarah Louise is the only midwife. Yeah. Like, I don't know. I can't imagine doing that to my girls
Yeah.
like at all.
Just for her to end up coming to live with her, like, yeah, you did all that putting my sister before me, but at the end of the day, in your last years, like, I'm the one that's stuck taking care of you.
Yeah.
Like,
And the same thing with the dad. Like she says, like, it sucks that Caroline is the one that gets to be there when I was the one that was of actual, like, more help to him than, you know, Caroline ever was. Yeah. And then also another really interesting thing about the kind of gender roles in this book is, right, hands are really important. And so there's a way that they talk about masculine hands and there's a way that they talk about feminine hands. And, like, maybe they're, like, more nurturing versus, like, really calloused. And I just thought it was interesting that Sarah Louise at some point is so obsessed with hands that she, like, buys Jergen hand lotion and, like, cuticle remover. I forgot what it was, like everything to, like, basically
Clear nail
make
polish. She wants
clear
her
nail
hands to be
polish just to
beautiful.
make your hands look beautiful.
and then
And then Caroline like kind of ruins that for her because
Caroline's always ruining stuff with her hands because she's the one at the beginning of the book that's like, ew, your nails are dirty. Like, after she brings in money and, like, stuff to eat, and it's like, okay, but girl, that's the reason we're going to have, like, a better dinner tonight. What
and
is
she says that to her, right? But doesn't she say something to her along the lines of, like, yeah, I'm paying for you to go to school, essentially, like, to go off
Yeah,
on the main
she
line
says she does bring it up sometimes with Caroline that, like, hey,
Yeah.
you know, you couldn't do any of this stuff if it wasn't for me, but it still does not seem like she appreciates that.
You had to go in her drawer and take out her Jergens. Like, she couldn't have nothing to herself. And
No,
then
it's just
she was like,
mean.
am I going? I guess she, like, threw it was a glass bottle of Jergens. So, like, she threw it at the wall or something. And then she's like, am I going crazy? But luckily we kept this between the two of us.
I was like, no, Louise, you're just being an angry teenager.
yeah. But it's the way that Caroline's like, I didn't think you would mind. And it's like, Caroline, please. I know you know that she would
Oh,
mind.
she 100% did
Yeah.
that on purpose.
Can I have something to myself? Twins
Right.
don't have to share everything.
You don't go into
Goodness.
people's
Well, and
underwear
Caroline's
drawers
not sharing
and take
anything.
stuff.
Except her boyfriend, I guess.
Like, how hard would it have been to be like, hey, can I borrow some of your lotion? Like, that would have been, I think that would have changed the equation.
And
so
Carolyn
much.
doesn't need it, okay?
Her hands are already beautiful.
Though she does have her hands are described the time that I can't remember why Sarah Louise broke down this time, but the one time where she breaks down and Caroline's like sort of trying to comfort her, she talks about like that Caroline's hands are so strong from that her, like she says something like her really strong fingers or something from playing the piano. So she does sort of have, at least the one time, I think there's like a bit of a nod that like, okay, Caroline's hands are masculine just in a different way. It's strength rather than dirt. You know, there's still beauty and strength. There's nothing beautiful about you're dirty, right?
Yeah.
I just feel so bad for her and her self-esteem. Like, she's very angry, and I understand why she's so angry.
She wants to be capable. She wants to be appreciated. She wants to be beautiful. Like, these are all very understandable human impulses.
Which I think kind of makes it even more interesting kind of where she lands, because I think she's considered a beauty in that town as well, because I think the fathers have a really hard
She was
time
like a
talking to
-5
her.
on Rasmus. She's like a 12 and Truett.
You gotta move to the right town.
Like they would all be like really awkward around her and like couldn't really look her in the eyes, but also they were just in like desperate need of her, and so she was very well lauded like and appreciated for what she did because no one else really could do that in that town. So
Saving the babies, saving the cats.
yeah.
Did y'all think they did enough to set up that why Sarah Louise would want to be a doctor? Because I was kind of
No.
struggling with that, because if anything, I would have thought that that would have seemed abhorrent to her because the doctors were so much a part of the attention that Caroline gets, and everyone's always fretting medically for Caroline. It just didn't seem to me like that would have been the dream she would have, unless, I don't know, unless she felt like that gave her power in some way.
I thought the plot
first
point
time-
was pasted on.
The first time she mentions anything about wanting to be a doctor or having any interest in anything is 87% of the way through the book. I highlighted it because I was just like, where is this coming from?
Yeah, that to me came out of left field. And then, I mean, it sure made sense once she's a midwife, you know, again, back to the hands thing that Darlene's bringing up, you know, her hands are how she's caregiving for her family initially. Like her hands are what are making her a good sailor and a good waterman. And then her hands are how she's caring for her new community. They talk about her delivering the calf and delivering the babies and like, Ben Carson, gifted hands. But, you know, I think there maybe is something there with the hands through line. I just didn't get that, like, she was set up to be a healer. Mm-hmm. And, like, being a caregiver is kind of different than being a healer. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, oh, no, I was so disappointed. I have to go be a nurse because I just always wanted to be a doctor.
Did you?
Did you? Yeah. Like, that doesn't come up.
Because, like, even, like, with, you know, like, honestly, I had no thoughts or ideas of her even wanting to go to college because, like...
She wanted to be on the water.
She wanted to be on the water. Like, she did not care to go to school. It didn't seem like it was a conflict for her of, like, oh, I want to go to school, but I also want to do this. Like, no, she was like, Paul's gone, my sister's gone. What reason do I have to want to go to school? Granted, yeah, she could be sad about that, but it still didn't feel like I want this education, I want this information, but I'm conflicted because there aren't people there. It was just like, you know, I don't want to go.
Yeah, that was one of the only things in the book where I really just felt like she didn't do the groundwork for it, because I do think this is a pretty nuanced book for the age that it's targeting. Like, there's a lot going on this, like, emotional front in the book, but that one just didn't... I don't know. I feel like maybe a scene got edited out early that would have...
She laid more groundwork to become a marine biologist with all the crowd talk.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Or
I don't know. Maybe
weather
like
person.
doctor was just the most prestigious
Can smell the
profession.
storm coming.
Maybe.
Should we talk a little bit more about the gender roles and sexism in the book? Because it seems like that comes into play from like the very beginning, where she's talking about like that maybe she would have been more valued if she had been a boy, because then she would have been able to help on the boat without people, you know, looking askance at the family. And she would have been able to, you know, have that role in the family rather than being just the less pretty sister and the less gifted sister and the twin that's in the shadow.
Yeah, I think that was really strong aspect of the book, that she felt that way, because it wouldn't matter that Caroline was like more fragile or anything like that. He, you know, as a he would have his own place in the family
and be valued for strength.
Right.
And like the physical attributes that she's bringing to
the
boat.
I feel like even more so, like they would have been a bit more external about their appreciation for those qualities that they're saying they always valued in Sarah Louise. But it's like, how valued could they have been if she didn't know that you were valuing them until like...
Yeah, and the grandmother would have left her alone too, because so much of the grandmother's like harping on things is related to, you know, slut shaming and like...
Whoredom.
Whoredom. We can talk about religion too. It's real important in this book.
I had to look that up as well. When I looked up the plot summary, I think I had read a little bit about the title, because I read through the plot summary. I was like, there is no Jacob that she's ever loved.
Yeah, it's an allusion to the Bible, right?
It's the name of the
favored son versus the non-favored son and the conflict between them.
I love when I finally catch to where the title is referenced in the book, so I highlighted it.
Where the grandmother says it?
Yeah.
And she's being such a jerk. Isn't she like following around going like, Jacob have I loved?
Yeah.
Like just repeatedly, which is like, what is wrong with that woman?
She needs the television and some shows to watch.
Yeah, she's just awful. And it was weird too. I mean, I think again, it was like a sign of the grandmother's decline, but she's more accepting of the mom earlier in the book. And then by the end, she is just like...
She's within the bounds of normal behavior, or closer to it.
And then she is just totally deranged by the end. Like she's literally following this woman around, just calling her a whore all day, which is...
Well, she's trying to bake bread or
really horrifying behavior.
Dishes.
And I'm still just mad at the dad for like, grow a spine, dude. Stick up for your wife. Stick up for your kid. He does nothing.
Yeah.
I didn't like him. There's a lot of weird stuff in the Bible about twins. Like, actually, because it's not just them. And she makes a reference to Cain in the book, too, right?
Yeah, she thinks she's like Cain, because I think she has a dream about killing
her sister.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was pretty intense, too, for a book that's really written for, like, a 9-year-old.
Yeah, because then it's just like, if you don't know what this is referencing, like, depending on when this came out, I mean, I guess you would just be expected to...
She beats her to death in the dream.
Yeah, I guess you would just kind of expect it to just go and flip a Bible open and, like, do the reference, like, hey, what is this verse about? Like, also, towards the end, she helps someone who gives birth to twins, and I think the second child was like weaker, and like she ended up breastfeeding the child.
Yeah,
which I felt like I didn't catch on to that until you read the summary, but like I feel like that was a really like strong way to end the book. Almost like she felt like she herself was not considered the weaker twin, but like the maybe like, because if you think about it, technically if there was a quote unquote weaker twin, it might be her sister because they figured she was fragile. But I feel like she kind of took on the role of like caring for the twin who may end up becoming more, not neglected, but like,
yeah,
I don't know.
It wasn't, I mean,
yeah.
I read that as she inverted the situation that happened to her.
Yes.
She got fed formula and put in a basket with grandma as caregiver because everything was given to Caroline, who was breastfed.
And Sarah Louise was fed on formula instead of breast milk. Because
Right.
all
She
the breast
had
milk
like
was
the
going
tinned
to
milk.
Carolyn.
Because all of the resources were put into the one child. And so she took the healthy child and gave that child to the mom.
Yeah.
Like, that's the kid that needs you. I'll take care of this one that has the medical issues.
Yes.
And I don't know that that fixes the situation. You know? Like, she just set up a different conflict than what she had had.
Also, you can't do that now because breast milk can carry pathogens. But it was the 40s, I guess, or maybe the 50s at this
People
point.
still do that now. I mean, there was a whole thing with Salma Hayek, the whole scandal when she nursed the refugee child at a camp that she was visiting.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Yeah.
You have to-
And a lot of doctors chimed in to say, like, no, that was the appropriate choice. That child needed to eat, and it was worth the risk to do that.
I guess if the choice is starving or not, that's better. But I mean,
yeah, and we don't wet nurse kids anymore.
Yeah.
In this country, but there are milk banks. You know, like there is still this idea that
I'm sure they screen to make sure that, like,
yes, they do. But back then they wouldn't have.
yeah, well, there
known,
was
right?
fewer pathogens to be concerned about that were in circulation at that point.
Yeah, I think they just didn't know.
Do we know these twins were both boys? Because they just kept talking about the weaker twin, but they said he specifically for the stronger twin.
I thought it was a he and she. Again, I thought it was fraternal twins again, right?
Oh, okay.
You know, fraternal twins don't get much love in stories, so, you know, shout out to us.
Did we want to talk about poverty? I do think that there's a pretty, outside of like maybe Tree Grows in Brooklyn and like Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, this seemed to have the most nuanced look at like systemic factors of poverty and like the cycles that poverty can create, which I thought was really interesting. Like reading it as an adult, I think it really stands up just fine as like an adult book in a lot of ways. It's just that the characters are young. What did y'all think about sort of the through line of poverty running through the book?
Well, this is not very deep, but I'm thinking, man, inflation is really a thing.
You stuck on the 20-cent piano lesson.
Making 80 cents a week off of the families that could do. One thing that I thought was interesting, I don't really know if this was, that's not really a deep thought, but I just thought it was interesting how, like, as, like, you know, they went through the Depression, and they went through like times where people just didn't have as much money, and they talked about families moving from the island to the mainland. That was something that I really thought was interesting because it kind of, I guess, like the water wasn't, you know, providing for them as much as they needed it to. So that was because, you know, initially I didn't initially realize that like this was an island of people who were mostly living in poverty, but that might have just been because like they were relegated to this small island. And I guess if everybody's almost living in that way, you don't really see it as much, as opposed to like they're being arranged, I guess, if that makes sense. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And something also that I thought about is like, you know, when Cole came back from the Navy, he was explaining to Sarah Louise, like, you know, this island is basically like washing away. Like there's like an acre or more missing from the last time that I was here. Like, do you not see that?
Yeah, the erosion thing is really interesting. I mean, I think she really did her research when she wrote this, because that is still, I mean, it's a major threat to Smith Island. Like they're trying to dredge now to like reestablish wetlands and stuff, because the island's going to be gone by like 2050 if they don't do something. But she remarks on Hiram's property early in the book that when they first built that house, they had all of this usable land, and now it's marshland.
He keeps talking about how he used to have a cow.
Yeah, like the only cow on the island, you know?
All right, so let's get into a little bit of a quiz. Shout out to BuzzFeed for this one. Let's get carcinized. What kind of crab are you? Carcinization is inevitable. We will all become crabs. Okay, so first, where do you want to spend the rest of your life?
I think I'm going to go with a picture where it's like half land, half water.
I'm probably going to go with the one on the bottom right. It looks like
A coral reef?
a coral reef, yeah. You know, it's pretty.
The dark, colorful one?
Yes, the dark, colorful one.
I'm picking that one too. It looks neat.
I think I'm going to go with the like very aqua looking one that's completely underwater.
That's pretty.
think.
Yeah,
It has like Caribbean vibes to me. Looks like there would be a good beach there.
Yeah. All right, so which part of your body are you most proud of? Legs, claws, eyes, shell, arms, tail?
Question mark.
I'm going to say legs. I'm nice and tall.
I have to go with claws. Just because.
Just because. I'll go with eyes.
I guess I'll go with legs because I feel like that's where my power is. Like,
How much do you like to stand out? I know I'm cute, but I want to hide sometimes. Please don't talk to me or my son ever again. I'm a living internet meme. I'm a rock, thanks. Everyone wants a piece of me, or it doesn't hurt to be pretty if you have a bodyguard.
I have a question about that last choice.
I'm a rock, thanks.
I'll go with I know I'm cute, but I want to hide sometimes.
Me, but most of the time.
Right.
I think the please don't talk to me or my son ever again is where my heart is.
Yeah.
But I think I generally feel like everyone wants a piece of me, but that's not because I stand
Okay,
out.
Brittany.
It's just my job.
That's the Leo in you.
I guess I'll go with that one. That feels like it's more present in my life that like I have to deal with everybody.
Please don't talk to me or my son, Mothman, ever again.
Now let's grab some grubs. Bugs, dry and crunchy. Algae, soft and wet. Clams, I like my food hard to get. Carcass, rotten like my soul. Plankton. Worms, 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 and fish, I guess.
I'll go with clams. I love clams.
But do I like my food hard to get?
That was the thing. Yeah, no. Plankton.
That seems to be enjoying it. I will go with bugs, dry and crunchy.
Carcass, rotten like my soul. It won't be hard to get. It's not going anywhere.
Being a crab is tough. How do you deal with your enemies? Can't catch me if they can't see me. Hire a bodyguard? I pinch. With like emoji face. I am the night. I am darkness. LOL, eat me if you can. I have enemies? Personally, I'm torn between LOL, eat me if you can, or I have enemies, but I'm going to go with LOL, eat me if you can.
I'm actually going to go with I have enemies.
Because why would anybody be your enemy? Have you met Darlene?
I pinch.
Of course.
Yeah, but it's the emoji that sells that answer.
Exactly.
Lastly, what motivates you to become a crab? Claws, duh. Terrestrial bipedality was a mistake. Crab. Crabs are cute, I guess. Darling, it's better down where it's wetter. I like the quiet life.
That should have been in your Sebastian voice.
Yeah.
That should have been
In
a
a
song.
weird, like, Jamaican accent. Caribbean accent.
I did not have one of those, y'all. I'm sorry. Oh, I see the vision now. I see the vision. Oh, like under the sea.
Yes.
Under the sea.
Under the sea. Darling, it's better down where it's wetter. Take it from me.
Y'all. That's the one. Darling, it's better down where it's wetter. We're gonna go with that.
I'm going with terrestrial bipedality was a mistake. I prefer being in the water to being on land, so
I'm also going with that one because it definitely was a mistake.
I'll go with crabs are cute, I guess.
Ooh, I'm an Atlantic horseshoe crab.
Okay.
You have become the Atlantic horseshoe crab, Limulus polyphemus. You're not even a crustacean, but what matters the most is in your heart, right? Like that bright blue blood which protects you from diseases. Plus, you're heckin' cute.
Did you get a name? Like yours? So mine says Reginald.
I didn't get a name. I just got Atlantic horseshoe crab.
You have become Reginald, the Japanese spider crab. You are the biggest, greatest of them all. You are feared and admired by many. You are the crab. But remember, you're only here on alternating Tuesdays. And that's a picture of...
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
That's horrifying. Good for Reginald.
I am also Reginald, the Japanese spider crab.
They really took that long legs comment that you made earlier.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's funny, though, because I feel like me and Hannah had, like, differing answers.
We did.
Yeah.
What'd you get, Darlene?
I got vampire crab.
Ooh.
You have become the vampire crab. You are beauty, you are grace. You are a purple crab with a pretty face. But
so
your
pretty.
beauty is a curse.
Beautiful. This is the skin of a killer, Bill.
You better hide from the pesky apes, or they will ship you on a plane, flying half a planet away. What?
Oh, that's a very strange. I feel like that's a reference to something that I have not seen.
Yeah.
Are
Is
they
it just 'cause
real?
it's so
They are
red?
real. It's a species of small land-living crabs found on Java, Indonesia.
That sounds like a lot.
All right. Each episode, we ask whether our book passes the Bechdel test. The Bechdel test asks whether a work features two female characters who talk to each other about something that doesn't involve men or boys. So, does it pass?
Ooh, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
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 Her grandma screams about whoredom.
Which in a way, it's kind of like about men, right? But I mean, I was going to say like the conversations with Carolyn sometimes are not
the
about
jargons.
men. Yeah.
Sisterly
Yeah, it's just,
rivalry.
Yeah.
A lot of their like hopes and aspirations.
And she has the talk with her mom about like where her mom says like we were never keeping you from leaving. And that's primarily about her sister and her relationship with her sister and grandmother and stuff.
Well, that's it for this episode of These Books Made Me. Join us next time when we'll discuss a book in which our main character works in her family's motel. If you think you know which book we're tackling next, follow us on Instagram. We're at These Books Made Me, and drop a comment on our Guess Our Next Read post.